most revealing scenes I've accidentally witnessed. When I was 19, I worked as a courier at KFC. I was returning from a delivery, and one of the employees was standing in the empty dining area in her underwear and on all fours, wiping the floor that someone had spilled on. Her butt was facing straight at me. She was wiping the floor, swaying her hips. I married her. My wife recently lost a lot of extra weight and, naturally, is proud of herself. I caught her in the moment when she was standing naked in the bathroom, looking at the reflection of her butt in the mirror. Folks, self-confidence is an undeniable aphrodisiac for both men and women. I was going door to door offering newspaper subscriptions. It was around 7 in the evening. I decided to save time and entered a multi-apartment building. I knocked on one door. Somewhere after 2 knocks, the door swung wide open. Behind it appeared a very beautiful brunette in black lace lingerie and stockings. She managed to say, "Oh, hello," and slammed the door in my face. Clearly, she was waiting for someone else. My balls nearly fell off in that moment. The same thing happened to me one summer before starting university. I was working as a mailman. I knocked on the door of one apartment, and it was opened by a woman who looked like a solid 10, wearing just a shirt thrown over her naked body. It turned out she had just come out of the shower. She said, "Sorry, I thought my sister had come." I replied, "No problem, here's your package." Unfortunately, she didn't invite me in. I went fishing in the wilderness in Slovenia. I saw 2 people standing far away downstream. It immediately seemed to me that they were naked. Getting a bit closer to them, I noticed a woman sitting on a chair with her legs spread wide. A man was standing in front of her in the water on his knees, shaving her pussy, occasionally dipping the razor in the river. I'll never forget that sight. I was at the pool, waiting my turn at the diving board to jump into the water. The girl who had just jumped ran back to the board and got in line, and her right breast was sticking out of her swimsuit top. I noticed it only after I'd been staring at her for a good 5 seconds. She giggled, adjusted it, and I had to jump for the first time with a boner. I was at a free concert in Central Park. The public toilets were just disgusting, so the girls mostly relieved themselves hiding behind trees near the concert venue. A homeless guy was secretly watching them from the nearest bench, furiously jerking off. One evening, when I was still in high school, my dog and I went for an evening walk around our neighborhood. She did her business and suddenly started barking, looking at one of the houses. Naturally, I looked in the same direction and saw my classmate who had just come out of the shower and was still topless. She was looking out the window. I don't think she noticed me, but when we got home, I happily gave the dog more food than usual. She'd earned it. How I missed that mutt. In the first days of college as a freshman, they took us on another orientation tour of the campus. I was sitting leaning against the wall when a stunningly beautiful girl came out of the dorm in a dress. A sudden gust of wind lifted the hem of her dress, and I noticed she wasn't wearing underwear. I had to walk around the campus a bit with an erection. This happened when my friend's dad had just married his stepmom. She was from Florida. We were moving her things into the house. It was midsummer. She sat down on the couch, joy for a 15-year-old boy like me. She lifted her shirt, and I saw the underside of her magnificent bust. Seeing me staring, she quickly lowered her shirt. But what I managed to see is etched in my mind forever. When a sexy nurse accidentally drops something and then bends over to pick it up, bam, thong. But unfortunately, the ratio of regular nurses to sexy ones is at least 20 to 1. I was flying home on leave from a naval hospital before Christmas 1973. I was still weak, so the flight attendants were very attentive to me. The stewardess placed extra pillows and blankets on the seat across from me. As she leaned over to grab the last one, she had garters and stockings under her skirt, nothing else. I would have gotten really aroused if I had been capable of anything more than just fantasies at that moment. At 187 centimeters tall, I weighed only 40 kilograms back then, having lost a lot of weight due to illness. So I could only dream of intimacy, but even if she had agreed, I couldn't have done anything. The funniest revealing scene I ever saw was at the airport. There was a tall, sexy blonde in a provocative and very tight red dress, so tight that everyone could see she was only wearing a thong underneath. We were walking in the same direction, and I was so bored that I decided not to pass her and slowed my pace. When I was almost at my gate, I noticed an elderly Asian couple on the bench opposite us. They were sitting facing us. I couldn't take my eyes off this girl's ass, hoping the hem of her dress would lift a bit. But seeing the couple, I started looking at the old man to see how he'd react to her. As she approached them, then went to the check-in counter nearby, the old Asian guy sat motionless, moving only his eyes. I could clearly see he was trying not to take his eyes off her without turning his head. It made me laugh so hard. But it got even funnier. As soon as the girl in red walked on, the elderly Asian woman, trying not to turn her torso, elbowed her husband in the side. He just grunted a bit and smiled slightly. Then I stopped looking at them so I wouldn't burst out laughing. Apparently, they'd been married so long that the wife knew her husband was checking out the girl, but he kept staring anyway, figuring it was worth the hits. God. When I was about 25, I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, next door to a family. That spring, their daughter came home from college. My bedroom window was opposite hers, but wooden blinds were always almost fully open in both windows. Every evening before bed, she would stand naked in front of the mirror for a long time, and sometimes sit on the edge of the bed and look in the mirror. That summer, for some reason, she was intently studying her body, and I think I studied it pretty well too. I parked my car at the motel where I was staying. The blinds on the window of the room opposite mine were open about 60 centimeters. I spotted a man in a suit, a woman in a revealing black dress, and another woman wearing only a garter belt and nylon stockings. Obviously, they were about to get up to some debauchery. It was a revealing scene, even though everyone was dressed. I was waiting for my flight and saw a young girl, 19 to 22 years old, in a completely white dress, standing by the window under the rays of sun streaming through. Her dress turned out to be semi-transparent. You could make out everything and nothing at the same time. It was a powerful image, a young, beautiful girl standing in the sunlight, framed by dark shadows. At 18, I was dating a girl whose mom was stunningly attractive, with breast implants and very slim. I always had to call ahead and warn her I was coming. One time, I arrived early and decided to peek into mom's room to say hi or something. Entering, I caught her in the middle of changing. The first thing I saw was her breasts. A couple of seconds were enough to etch that sight in my memory forever. Many years ago, when I lived in the States, Miami, Florida, I had a close friend who was a successful lawyer. He lived with his uncle because he kept getting into trouble at his parents' house. One time when I was over, he called me to the window and said the uncle's second wife, who was just over 20, was swimming in the pool. Apparently, she didn't know we were home. I parted the curtain and saw a naked woman in the water, and she was stunningly beautiful. I think I stared at her for 30 minutes, hiding behind the curtains. Once, I saw a lesbian couple at a bus stop. They were holding hands and staring at their phones, an ordinary sight. I wasn't looking at them but at the street. Suddenly, one of the girls lifted her partner's hand to her mouth and quickly licked her palm. They smiled at each other and then pressed close. It was a fleeting but very intimate scene. It even turned me on. In 10th grade, our whole class went to Key Largo, Florida, for a scuba diving trip. Where we stayed, there was also an underwater hotel. On the first day, they taught us how to snorkel properly. The scuba lessons had been before the trip. During training, we were diving in one spot near the underwater hotel. At some point, the instructors noticed the students were spending more time underwater and all gathered in a cluster. One of them dove and swam over to see what we were looking at. We saw a young couple who had rented a room for their honeymoon and were doing what all newlyweds do in the room, forgetting to close the curtains. The instructor knocked on their window to warn them they were being watched by 40 or so school kids. When they finally noticed his knock, the girl got really scared and reached for the curtain with one hand, trying to cover her nakedness with the other. Her husband also seemed shocked, but a couple of moments before she jerked the curtain, I noticed a proud expression on his face, like he was showing off his wife's beauty to school kids he'd never see again. After that incident, they gathered us all and gave us a lecture on the unacceptability of our behavior. Me and a few friends were playing poker at my brother's house. We were in the basement. I went up to the kitchen to grab some beer. Suddenly, my gaze fell on my brother and his wife's bedroom. The door wasn't closed. My sister-in-law was changing. I imprinted in my memory her body in just underwear. She had beautiful breasts, small but beautiful. But her ass, when she wore jeans, you could see she had a pretty big butt, but in underwear, it looked not only big and round but also very firm. I stared at her for a good 5 seconds until she disappeared into the other end of the bedroom. She and my brother divorced a year later. She was hysterical, all our acquaintances wondered how he could live with her for so long. Only I understood the reason. Once, I saw a revealing scene that I'll remember for a long time. I was running down the subway stairs to the second platform when the train pulled into the station, creating a sharp gust of air. And when that happened, purely by chance, I looked left and noticed the most magnificent pair of legs I'd ever seen. They belonged to a young Asian girl wearing a skirt. I don't know what I did to deserve the chance to see this beautiful girl at exactly that moment in time, but right at that second, the gust of air lifted her skirt right up. It reminded me of a scene from a Japanese anime. I can't even describe it properly. Can you say that because of her bare ass presented to me in all its glory without underwear, as it seemed to me a craving for Asian women appeared? Possibly, because I forgot about the perfectly smooth, full, with a delightful yellowish tan skin tone. Even now, 20 years later, it takes my breath away when I recall that scene. What's even more interesting, 10 years later, I was enjoying life in China and wondered if that sight was a turning point that changed the course of my life forever. To this day, I don't know the answer to that question. I only know I'll never forget it. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new super interesting discussions. And for now, we suggest watching our other videos.